how long was this year? First, the biggest public health crisis in 100 years hit us. Then the United States economy collapsed. And now, most of our big cities look like war zones after weeks of uprising, looting, and violence. Something happened one after another, and this caused a huge trouble on the mental health of the American people. Of course, this year we were not exactly in great shape. In 2019, it was reported that the suicide rate in the United States of America was all-time high. Alcohol-related deaths were all-time high, and the drug overdose deaths were all-time high. The truth is that we were already very miserable before 2020 came, and now a brand new survey has discovered that we are even more unhappy as a result of everything that happened this year. Spoiler alert, 2020 has been rough on the American psyche. Folks in the United States are more unhappy today than they have been in nearly 50 years. This bold yet unsurprising conclusion comes from the COVID response tracking study conducted by NORC at the University of Chicago. It finds that just 14% of American adults say they are very unhappy, down from 31% who said the same in 2018. The survey conducted in late May draws on nearly a half century of research from the General Social Survey, which has collected data on American attitudes and behaviors at least every other year since 1972. No less than 29% of Americans have ever called themselves very happy in that survey. Can you say that you are very happy with your life? I hope, and I would like to think, have more content with their lives than the general population as a whole. Personally, I would definitely label myself as very happy, but it seems that most of the population certainly doesn't feel the same. According to the survey, coronavirus lockups are one of the biggest reasons Americans are less happy these days. Having to stay away from others made many people feel lonely. About twice as many Americans report being lonely today as in 2018, and not surprisingly given the lockdowns that tried to contain the spread of the coronavirus. There has also been a drop in satisfaction with social activities and relationships. Compared with 2018, Americans also are about twice as likely say they, sometimes or often, have felt a lack of companionship, 45% versus 27%, and felt left out, 37% versus 18% in the past 4 weeks. Also, the public is less optimistic today about the standard of living improving for the next generation than it has been in the past 25 years. Only 42% of Americans believe that when their children reach their age, their standard of living will be better. A solid 57% said that in 2018, since the question was asked in 1994, the previous low was 45% in 1994. People are naturally social beings, and we were created to love and be loved. I think our politicians greatly underestimate the harm that social isolation will create for many people. In some cases, the results have been absolutely devastating. Meanwhile, many Americans also feel unhappy these days for economic reasons. More than 100,000 businesses have been permanently closed up to this point in 2020. Economic activity worldwide has declined rapidly, and more than 44 million of Americans have requested unemployment benefits. Initially, it was hoped that most of these jobs will eventually come back, but now it will not happen very clearly. In fact, a new forecast predicts that 42% of job losses will be permanent. The Bloomberg Economics research highlights the challenge. found that about 50% of United States job losses come from the combination of lockdown and weak demand, 30% from reallocation shock, and 20% from high unemployment benefits, encouraging workers to stay home. Financial markets are already pricing in the risk, according to the Bloomberg economists. Equity market returns across different sectors and for companies of varying sizes suggest investors are betting on a shift in profits between firms, similar to that witnessed after the global financial crisis of 2008. Lost profits spells lost jobs. Other studies carry similar warnings. Research published in May by the Becker-Friedman Institute at the University of Chicago estimated 42% of recent layoffs in the United States will be permanent. In other words, millions of Americans who lost their jobs during this epidemic will not be able to get their old jobs back. When I started to tell my listeners that most of these things would never return, I got really bad comments. There were some people who were definitely smoked because I could suggest something like this, but now the truth of the matter has become clear to everyone. Unfortunately, a large part of the population was not prepared for an economic shock of this size. In fact, a new study has discovered that 33% of all Americans do not feel prepared to deal with the financial impact of the pandemic. Even before COVID-19 was a household name, many Americans struggled to build up an emergency fund. Now, for some, the need for such a foundation is painfully clear. A full third, 33% of respondents said they do not feel prepared to deal with the financial impact of the pandemic. If our current financial situation gets worse, before it gets better, Americans need to have money set aside that they can lean back on as a last resort. Freireid said, "If you don't currently have an emergency fund, try to set aside as much as you can every month and aim to build enough to cover between 3 and 6 months of living expenses." For years, I've been urging my listeners to create emergency funds, and I hope most of them follow this advice, because things won't come back anytime soon. The bad news is that most of the economic troubles postponed by unprecedented government intervention are about to hit us hard, and really bad news is what the economic problems we are facing now are going to face in the coming years. Needless to say, this will put more stress on Americans' mental health. So, if you think people are absolutely crazy right now, wait until we see how bad things are when our society really begins to melt. But that does not mean that you have to be personally miserable, that everything around you will crumble. If you derive meaning and purpose in life from your career, ambitions, bank account, social status, and all the things you have accumulated, you will definitely have a very difficult time dealing with things to come. However, instead, if you choose to derive from what really means and purpose in life, you will not be shaken, even if all your plans, programs, and material items are taken from you. All human history is developing until the moment we live in it, and you were born such a time. So don't rub into a hole and complain about how bad things are as conditions get worse. Instead, choose to stand up and be the one you are created with. Dear Daily News Report viewers, you can find other videos by clicking on the top right button. We recommend watching, subscribing, and sharing. Thanks in advance. Most of the idea, comment, information, and criticism containing in these videos have been created by Daily News Report. Before making any important investment decision, use the information contained in these videos as a starting point for conducting your own research. If you make any investment or legal decision, it is advised to consult an expert before making this decision.